Who do you think is going to be the guy?
Well, it's not who I think is going to be the guy. It's I think who needs to be the guy.
Oh,
and I think the who needs to be the guy is Cyrus Moss. Okay. He is a 5-star defensive end from Nevada. Some have him as a 5-star. He's another guy that didn't get a play as a junior because of the state not having football in the fall. But to me, he is that true 5-star upside elite Viper type of player that Notre Dame wants and needs. He is an explosive athlete. He reminds me more sort of a Julian Okwara with Dalen Hayes cover ability. That's kind of how I'd evaluate him. He's not built like Dalen. He's not, 260. He's not going to be like a thick, lower bodied 265 like Dalen Hayes. His body's built more like Julian, although I think he's got a little bit better frame than Julian Okwara. But he's going to be a 245 to 255 pound guy, athletic, explosive burst off the edge. You watch him in coverage and he's dropping underneath routes. He's, there's a pick 6 he had in high school. And again, he plays at Bishop Gorman out in Las Vegas. So they're playing national programs. That's just kind of what they've always done. And he's dropping under curl routes and picking them off and returning them for touchdowns. He's raw technically, and his body needs time to develop, but he's a guy that to me has a chance to be an impact edge rusher in college. And I don't just mean like, a guy that can give you 4 or 5 sacks. I'm talking about a guy that can be like a dynamic Josh Allen from Kentucky type of edge rusher. Now, you never know how kids are going to pan out, but when I see Cyrus Moss, I'm thinking, wow, that's the kind of athlete that Notre Dame needs more of along the defensive line. And I think he brings a little bit of a different body type than the 2 guys that they have in the class. And so I love the complementary nature of what he would be to Tyson Ford and Aiden Gobaira. He's 6'4", 220 right now, but he doesn't have that big frame like Aiden Gobaira has, where like eventually he's going to be 270 potentially. He's more of a traditional athletic edge Viper. And so Cyrus Moss, to me, at this point in time, and my understanding talking to different sources, is he has been at the sort of the top of their board for that position for a while. My thought would be is that this commitment gets Notre Dame to now focus even more time on him. And so let's kind of talk about Brian Kelly for a second. And they talk about how a head coach needs to be. This is the situation now where you've been able to narrow your board. You've already got a couple guys committed. This is where the head coach needs to step in as well and say, that kid needs to be a priority of yours until we get him. Right. And so it needs to be Marcus Freeman. It needs to be Mike Ellison. It needs to be Brian Kelly. It needs to be Brian Poling. They need to put the full court press on that kid. He likes Notre Dame. They're in a good place. So
stand with him, and who else is involved?
Yeah. I mean, everyone.
So what you're telling me is it's not like, I shouldn't say what you're telling me. It's not like he goes to a school that nobody knows about. He goes to Bishop Gorman.
He's not an under-the-radar kid. Right. He's not some under-the-radar kid that you can just sneak past people. Like a Jason Onye that we've seen. I mean, you're going to have to beat Alabama, USC, programs like that. That's who's on Cyrus Moss. Now, I do think he's a kid that has interest in an academic institution. He's you listen to him interview as a sophomore, and you're like, we've had a couple interviews with him at Irish Breakdown in the past, and you're like, this is a pretty savvy sophomore in high school. You know what I mean? This is not a kid that you expect to be like a 15, 16. I mean, he's got some maturity to him. He's got some focus to him. He's got some big picture to his thought process, thinking beyond just, I want to go somewhere where I can have 15 sacks and win a championship. He wants those things, but he also has a deeper understanding. And guys like that tend to gravitate and like Notre Dame. And so the point is, maybe you can't get half the, you can't recruit half the guys in the top 100, but there are always guys like this that are Notre Dame fits. This is the kind of kid you need to put the absolute full court press on and make sure you get. There are some other kids in the class that I like. There's some hybrid players like Arliss Boardingham from California, who's kind of a high school receiver. Elijah Brown from Ohio, who is a tight end, a really good tight end. There's some intriguing players like that, DJ Wezolak. So, then you could say, maybe instead of taking a second defensive tackle in the class, they need to get a first. But, maybe instead of taking 2 defensive tackles, which I think is a need, maybe they take a 4th defensive end like an Isaac Ham, who's a 6'5", 260-pound defensive tackle that they want to turn into sort of like a Riley Mills 3 technique. So there's some flexibility with a lot of the players on the board. And Mike Elson has really done a great job so far of having a big board of talented players. What I'm curious to see is, does this eliminate, this should, but do they eliminate certain players? For example, Alex Bauman, who is the younger brother of Kevin Bauman. I don't know if he's a take now for me. I don't know, unless you're going to take 4 defensive ends. I'm not sure if you want to take him at this point in time. Do you want to take him and then say, well, we can't take Cyrus Moss? So I'm curious to see how they handle that. Or do they say, yeah, we'll take a kid like that, but because he can also play tight end. That's the other thing is Alex Bauman also plays tight end like his brother. Elijah Brown, Arliss Boardingham, the reason I mention them is they're also offensive players. So, maybe you bring them in now, and if depending on how your board fills out, so not that those guys would commit to Notre Dame now, but I'm just making the point that I think there's some flexibility there. But the fact is they have to make sure that there's room to bring in a guy like Cyrus Moss, and they have to put the full court press on him as a staff. And it's almost like you say to Mike Elson, like there's literally no one more important right now on your board than him. And everyone needs to be involved. Chris O'Leary, Tommy Reese, Jeff, everybody should be talking to Cyrus Moss in some way, shape, form, or fashion to make him to do what you got to do. Cause this is a Notre Dame kid, but they don't get every Notre Dame kid. That's the problem. And this is one that they need to close on. If they can add Cyrus Moss to a defensive end class that already has Tyson Ford and Aiden Gobaira, we haven't seen a defensive end class like that at Notre Dame since 2016. And we all know how the 2016 class panned out because it's now going to have 4 ends from that class are going to end up playing pro football. If you think about think about that. Dalen Hayes and Adetokunbo Ogundeji are about to get drafted. And Khalid Kareem and Julian Aguero were 5th and 3rd round picks respectively last season. So to be able to produce 4 NFL players from one defensive draft class is impressive. And you add Cyrus Moss to this class, I think that's a similar type of – those are 3 kids that have potential to be professional football players down the road and impact college players. You have to get it done. And that's why I say Cyrus Moss is a must, absolute must get for Notre Dame at this point.